Okay, watch this. Number 10. The ghost you are built from. Somewhere inside you right now there is DNA that does not belong to your species. Not Neanderthal, not Denisovan. Something older. Something that split from the human line 650,000 years ago, survived in Africa for 500,000 years, bred with your ancestors as recently as 40,000 years ago, and then vanished without leaving a single bone behind. Not one tooth, not one skull fragment, not one tool, nothing. In 2020, a team of geneticists at UCLA were sequencing the genomes of West African populations, specifically the Yoruba and the Mende, when their software flagged a statistical anomaly that should not have existed. Large chunks of DNA in those populations did not match Homo sapiens. They did not match Neanderthals. They did not match Denisovans. They matched a lineage that had diverged from the modern human tree approximately 650,000 years ago, a lineage that, according to every fossil record on the planet, was never supposed to exist at all. The scientific term for this is a ghost lineage. A species we have never seen, never touched, never excavated, never photographed, inferred entirely from the genetic shadow it left inside the cells of several 100 million living people who have no idea they are carrying it. We do not know what it looked like. We do not know where it lived. We do not know what it ate, how it communicated, how it buried its dead, or whether it buried its dead at all. We only know that it was here, that it was real, that it touched our ancestors intimately enough to leave permanent marks in our genome, and that it is gone, and we are the only evidence it ever existed. West and Central Africa has almost no preserved hominin fossil record compared to East and South Africa. The acidic soils and tropical humidity destroy bone on the scale of a few thousand years, which means that a significant portion of human evolutionary history, possibly the most important portion, happened in the one region of the planet that systematically erases its own evidence. The bones are dissolved. The campsites are rotted. The tools are scattered. But the DNA is still copying itself inside living cells right now, carrying instructions written by a species the physical record says was never there. You are carrying code written by a ghost, and the ghost has no name. Number 9. The skull that spent 85 years at the bottom of a well. In 1933, a Chinese laborer was helping build a bridge over the Songhua River in Harbin, a city in northeastern China that was under Japanese military occupation at the time. While digging, he pulled out a skull. Not a small one. A massive, nearly complete cranium with thick brow ridges, a broad nose, enormous eye sockets, and a brain case almost the same volume as a modern human's. It was the size of a basketball. He did not report it. He did not hand it to the Japanese authorities. He wrapped the skull, carried it home, and hid it at the bottom of his family's well, and there it sat for 85 years. The man never told anyone outside his family. He lived his entire life, grew old, and it was only on his deathbed in 2018 that he told his grandchildren about the skull in the well. They retrieved it and donated it to Hebei Geo University. When researchers finally examined it, they realized they were looking at something that did not fit any known classification. In 2021, a team of Chinese scientists published a series of papers declaring the skull a new species, Homo longi, the dragon man, named after the Heilongjiang province, which translates to Black Dragon River. The skull was at least 146,000 years old. It had a brain case of 420 milliliters, comparable to modern humans. But the face was wrong. The brow ridges were too thick. The jaw was too wide. The teeth were too large. It looked like a human that had been designed by a slightly different architect, using the same blueprint. Then in 2025, paleogeneticist Qiaomei Fu scraped plaque off the skull's teeth, extracted fragments of ancient DNA, and matched them to the only other species they could belong to. The dragon man was a Denisovan. After 15 years of knowing the Denisovans only from a single finger bone and a molar found in a Siberian cave, science finally had a face. And the face had been sitting at the bottom of a well in occupied China since before World War II. The skull is the most complete Denisovan specimen ever found. It is also the most complete example of a species that once ranged from Siberia to Southeast Asia, that interbred with both Neanderthals and modern humans, and that left DNA inside billions of living people today. The high-altitude gene that allows Tibetans to live above 4,000 meters without altitude sickness is Denisovan. Every time a Sherpa carries supplies to Everest Base Camp, a piece of Dragon Man is doing the breathing. And the only reason we have any of this is because a laborer in 1933 decided to hide a skull from an occupying army. One man's paranoia, preserved in groundwater for nearly a century, rewrote the face of an entire extinct lineage. Number 8. The funeral directors with brains the size of oranges. A species with a brain 1/3 the size of yours practiced intentional burial, used controlled fire underground, and may have scratched the oldest known engravings into rock. That sentence should be impossible. The entire framework of human cognitive evolution says it should be impossible. And yet 550 bone fragments in a South African cave say otherwise. In 2013, 2 recreational cavers in the cradle of humankind squeezed through a vertical chute so narrow it had to be measured in centimeters. At the bottom, they found a chamber inside the Rising Star cave system that had no natural predator access, no surface light, and no evidence of prehistoric flooding. Scattered across the floor were bones. They backed out and called paleontologist Lee Berger. Berger could not fit. He posted a job listing for experienced cavers, who were also trained scientists and small enough to reach the chamber. 6 women answered the ad. Over 2 years, they pulled more than 500 fragments from that chamber, representing at least 15 individuals. The species was new. They named it Homo naledi. Naledi had a brain roughly 560 cubic centimeters, about the size of an orange. Gorillas average 500. Modern humans average 1/400. And yet the geology of the chamber eliminates every explanation except one. Naledi carried its dead into that space on purpose, one body at a time, through a squeeze so tight it barely admits an adult human even today. And total darkness. Repeatedly, over what appears to be generations. In 2018, the excavation team found charcoal residue on the chamber walls. In 2022, they found geometric engravings scratched into the rock at regular intervals. A species with the neurological hardware of a large primate was performing mortuary rituals, maintaining fire in a space with no natural ventilation, and marking surfaces with repeated abstract patterns, while Homo sapiens was just beginning to emerge on the surface above. Either brain size does not determine behavioral complexity the way we assumed for the last 100 years, or something with the cognitive capacity of a gorilla independently invented religion. There is no version of this finding that leaves the textbooks intact. Number 7. The first toolmaker. 2.4 million years ago, in what is now the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, a species of human appeared that changed the rules of survival on this planet permanently. They were small. Adults stood about 4 feet 3 inches tall and weighed roughly 40 kilograms. They had long arms, curved fingers, and bodies that still retreated into trees when threatened. Their brains were barely 600 cubic centimeters. By modern standards, they were tiny, fragile, and physically outmatched by almost every predator on the African savanna. But they could do something no other living thing on Earth had ever done. They could pick up a round stone, strike it against an angular rock, and produce a sharp flake capable of cutting through hide and sinew. They could manufacture a tool with intent, purpose, and repeatable technique. They were Homo habilis, the handyman, the first member of the genus Homo, your oldest confirmed relative in the human lineage. Louis and Mary Leakey spent 29 years digging in Olduvai Gorge before they found the first habilis remains. When their son Jonathan pulled a juvenile jaw and hand bones out of the earth in 1960, the family had been searching so long that most of the field had given up on them. The jaw was different from the robust, flat-faced Paranthropus skulls they had been finding. The teeth were smaller, the brain was bigger, and the hand bone suggested a grip that could manipulate objects with precision. They named the species habilis because they believed, correctly, that this creature was the one making the thousands of Oldowan stone tools eroding out of the gorge's oldest layers. Habilis lived alongside at least 3 other hominin species simultaneously. Homo rudolfensis, Homo ergaster, and Paranthropus boisei all shared the same African landscape during the same geological window. 4 species of proto-human, competing for the same food, dodging the same predators, occupying the same stretch of savanna. One of those species, DNA, leads directly to you. The other 3 are dead ends. The fossil record of one particular habilis individual, known as OH7, shows something that paleoanthropologists still debate. The bones bear marks consistent with attack by at least 2 different large predators, a crocodile and a big cat. This juvenile human appears to have been killed by 2 apex predators at the same time, or in rapid succession. The first toolmaker on the planet, the species that started everything you now call civilization, was prey, and it was prey to multiple hunters simultaneously. That is where the human story begins. Not in triumph, in desperation. Number 6. The cannibal. 800,000 years ago, in the foothills of what is now northern Spain, a species of human was eating other humans. Not out of starvation, not as a last resort, regularly, deliberately, with tools designed for the job. Homo antecessor was discovered in the Grandalina cave site in the Sierra de Atapuerca in 1994. The initial find included fragments of at least 6 individuals, and when the bones were cleaned and examined, the marks on them matched a pattern that archaeologists had seen thousands of times before on animal bones at butchery sites. Cut marks from stone tools, scraping marks where flesh was stripped from bone, impact fractures where marrow was extracted. The bones of Homo antecessor had been processed for consumption by other members of Homo antecessor, children included. The species is dated to between 1.2 million and 800,000 years ago, making it one of the oldest known human species in Europe. Antecessor had a modern-looking face, with a flat mid-face and a prominent nose that would not look out of place on a modern European. But the brow ridges were heavy, the jaw was thick, and the overall build was robust in a way that no living population matches. Some researchers believe antecessor is the last common ancestor of both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. If that is correct, then the species that gave rise to every living human being on the planet today was also a species that routinely butchered and consumed its own kind. The DNA analysis done on antecessor dental enamel in 2020 confirmed it sits close to the divergence point between the Neanderthal and sapiens lineages, which means the family tree splits at a cannibal. The cut marks show no ritual pattern, they match the efficiency of food processing. These were not funerary practices. They were meals. And the age distribution of the consumed individuals suggests that the youngest and smallest members of competing groups were the most common targets. Homo antecessor ate its neighbors, children with the same tools it used to butcher deer. The question that the Atapuerca researchers still cannot fully answer is whether the cannibalism was nutritional, territorial, or both. What they can confirm is that the oldest known European human species was systematically consuming other humans at least 800,000 years ago. And that species may be the root of your entire family tree. Number 5. The tank that lost. For roughly 1 million years, one of the most physically imposing primates that ever lived shared the African landscape with your direct ancestors. It had a skull built like a battering ram, a jaw that could generate more bite force than any other hominin ever measured, teeth the size of thumbnails, set in a face so flat and wide it earned the nickname Nutcracker Man the day it was found. Paranthropus boisei was discovered by Mary Leakey at Olduvai Gorge in 1959, 1 year before the Leakeys found Homo habilis at the same site. The skull, designated OH5, was so different from anything previously found that it was initially classified in its own genus. Boisei stood about the same height as a modern human, but its skull was a completely different engineering project. Massive sagittal crests ran along the top of the skull to anchor jaw muscles of extraordinary size. The molars were 4 times the surface area of yours. The zygomatic arches, the cheekbones that frame your face, flared outward like buttresses to accommodate the muscle volume required to operate that jaw. Boisei was built to chew. Specifically, it was built to process tough, fibrous plant material that no other primate could efficiently digest. Carbon isotope analysis of Boisei teeth shows a diet dominated by C4 plants, grasses, and sedges, the kind of low-quality, high-fiber vegetation that grows abundantly on open savannas, but that most primates avoid because it requires enormous energy to process. For 1 million years, this strategy worked. Boisei survived multiple climate shifts, multiple ice ages, multiple fluctuations in the availability of the fruits and tubers that other hominins depended on. When the forests retreated and the grasslands expanded, Boise thrived while other species starved. It was, in every physical sense, the tank of the hominin world. And then, around 1.2 million years ago, Paranthropus boise disappeared. The species that had outlasted climate catastrophe after climate catastrophe vanished in a window that overlaps with the expansion of Homo erectus across the same African landscapes. The tank lost to the generalist. The specialist jaw, the massive molars, the million years of dietary dominance, all of it erased by a smaller, weaker, more flexible cousin that could eat anything and go anywhere. The lesson Boise teaches is brutal. Evolution does not reward strength, it rewards flexibility. And the species with the most impressive hardware on the savanna was also the one that could not adapt when the rules changed. Number 4. The Neanderthals were not what you think. 400,000 years. That is how long the Neanderthals owned Europe before your ancestors arrived and ended them. They had been there for longer than Homo sapiens had existed anywhere. Their brains were slightly larger than yours. Not smaller, larger. And the things they did with those brains should make you reconsider every cartoon you have ever seen of a stupid caveman dragging a club. They buried their dead with arrangements of flowers. That is not speculation. It is pollen evidence recovered from Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, where a Neanderthal body was interred with clusters of yarrow, cornflower, and hollyhock. They cared for severely injured members of their groups for years, based on skeletons showing healed amputations and fractures, so severe that the individual could not have survived without sustained, deliberate help from others. They crafted jewelry from eagle talons 40,000 years before any sapiens population did the same thing. They painted abstract shapes on cave walls in Spain at least 65,000 years ago, 20,000 years before modern humans reached Europe. They used medicinal plants. Their inner ear anatomy suggests they could hear the same frequency range humans use for spoken language. These were not brutes. These were people. People who had culture, who mourned, who decorated themselves, and who took care of their weakest members when it would have been easier to leave them behind. Then, around 45,000 years ago, modern humans walked out of Africa into Europe. Within 5,000 years, the Neanderthals were gone, every single one, across an entire continent. The cause is still debated. Climate, disease, resource competition, genetic absorption through interbreeding, probably all of it, operating simultaneously. But the pattern is the same pattern that appears at every point in this list. A species survives hundreds of thousands of years of ice ages, predators, and volcanic winters. Then it meets us, and it does not survive us. If you have any ancestry outside of sub-Saharan Africa, between 1 and 4% of your DNA is Neanderthal. The gene that determines how your skin responds to cold is Neanderthal. Several immune system variants that shape how your body fights viruses are Neanderthal. The gene cluster that regulates how your body stores fat through winter is partially Neanderthal. You are not a pure species, you are a merger. And the other party to that merger has been extinct for 40,000 years, while its machinery keeps running inside you, servicing a body that does not know it is partly built from something else. Number 3. The species nobody can agree on. In 1972, a fossil hunter named Bernard Ingenio, working under the direction of Richard Leakey at Lake Turkana in Kenya, found a skull that split the entire field of paleoanthropology in half. The skull, designated KNMER 1470, was 1.9 million years old. It had a brain case of about 750 cubic centimeters, significantly larger than Homo habilis. Its face was flat, broad, and surprisingly modern-looking for something that old, and it did not fit cleanly into any existing species. Some researchers classified it as a large-brained variant of Homo habilis. Others insisted it was different enough to warrant its own species name, Homo rudolfensis, after the old name for Lake Turkana. The argument has continued for over 50 years and has never been resolved. The skull sits in a taxonomic no-man's land, claimed by multiple camps, owned by none. What makes rudolfensis important is not the classification debate. It is what the skull implies about the world it came from. At 1.9 million years ago, the area around Lake Turkana was home to at least 4 distinct hominin species simultaneously: Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, Homo ergaster, and Paranthropus boise were all living, eating, and dying within the same ecosystem at the same time. 4 separate experiments in being human, occupying the same landscape, subject to the same droughts, the same predators, and the same evolutionary pressures. That is not how we were taught evolution works. The textbook model is a clean ladder. One species leads to the next. Habilis becomes erectus, erectus becomes sapiens. A straight line from primitive to advanced. The reality at Turkana 1.9 million years ago looks nothing like a ladder, it looks like a bush. Multiple branches growing in parallel, competing, overlapping, and pruning each other in real time. And Skull 1470 is the evidence that the bush was far more crowded than anyone assumed. 3 of those 4 species went extinct, the 4th led to you. The margin between becoming an ancestor and becoming a fossil may have been nothing more than which group found water during the right drought in the right century. Number 2. The bridge no one remembers. In 2010, a team of paleoanthropologists led by Lee Berger, the same scientist who would later discover Homo naledi, announced a discovery from the Malapa cave in the cradle of humankind in South Africa that was supposed to rewrite the origin story of our entire genus. They had found a species that blurred the line between Australopithecine and Homo so completely that it made the definition of human feel arbitrary. Australopithecus sediba was roughly 2 million years old. It had a tiny brain, about 420 cubic centimeters, smaller than a chimpanzee's. It had the long arms and small body of an Australopithecine, but its pelvis was shaped for upright walking in a way that looked strikingly human. Its hands combined a powerful grip with a precision grip, the kind needed for tool use. Its teeth were small and human-like, and its ankles showed a unique combination. The upper ankle was built for tree climbing, but the lower ankle was built for walking on flat ground. Sediba was doing both at the same time. 2 million years ago, the 2 most complete specimens, juvenile male and an adult female, were found together. They appear to have fallen into the cave through a vertical shaft, possibly while searching for water during a drought. Their bodies landed on top of each other and were preserved in a layer of calcified sediment. Mother and child, locked together in stone for 2 million years. Berger argued that Sediba was the direct ancestor of the genus Homo, the missing bridge between the Australopithecines and the first true humans. If he is right, then the creature that gave rise to everything you call human, every tool, every language, every city, every war, had a brain smaller than a chimp's and spent half its time in trees. The field has not reached consensus. Many researchers think the timeline does not quite work. But the anatomy is there, and the anatomy is uncomfortable. Sediba lived at the same time as the earliest known Homo species, which means the jump from not human to human was not a clean transition. It was a crowded, overlapping, blurred mess of species that shared features across what we now call a species boundary. The line between human and not human was never a line. It was a gradient, and Sediba sat right in the middle of it, walking upright with a chimp-sized brain, climbing trees with hands built for tools, dying of thirst in a cave with her child 2 million years before anyone would find her and argue over what she was. Number 1. The rewrite. In 2021, a team of researchers proposed something that should have been bigger news than it was. They published a paper arguing that 2 of the most commonly cited species in human evolution, Homo heidelbergensis and Homo rhodesiensis, should be scrapped entirely and replaced with a single new species, Homo bodoensis, named after a 600,000-year-old skull found at Bododar in Ethiopia in the 1970s, a skull that had evidence of being deliberately defleshed after death, with stone tool cut marks across the face. Whether that was ritual or consumption is still debated. The proposal is an attempt to clean up a mess that has been accumulating for over a century. The term heidelbergensis was coined in 1908 based on a jaw found in Germany. The term rhodesiensis was coined in 1921 based on a skull found in Zambia. Both have been used as catch-all categories for any pre-sapiens fossil that did not fit neatly into Homo erectus or Homo sapiens. The problem is that the European specimens assigned to heidelbergensis are now widely believed to be early Neanderthals, while the African specimens are almost certainly direct ancestors of modern humans. Lumping them together was never accurate. It was just convenient. Bodoensis, if accepted, would be your direct ancestor, not Homo heidelbergensis, not Homo rhodesiensis. A species named after an Ethiopian skull with cut marks on its face, dating to 600,000 years ago, sitting in the direct ancestral line of every living human being on the planet. The field has not fully accepted the change. Naming species in paleoanthropology is political. It determines whose discovery gets priority, whose career gets validated, whose country gets to claim the origin point. Bodoensis shifts the center of the story from Europe to Africa, from a German sandpit to an Ethiopian riverbed, from a colonial-era naming convention to a post-colonial correction. That kind of change does not happen fast in a field that has been arguing about a single jaw for over 100 years. But the bones do not care about academic politics. And the bones say that the species sitting at the root of your family tree is an African human, from a site most people have never heard of, whose face was scraped clean after death by someone who had a reason for doing it that we will never know. For most of the existence of your lineage, being human was not special. It was one option among many, running in parallel across 3 continents at the same time. Some of those species were taller. Some were smaller than a modern 5-year-old. Some buried their dead with more care than you will receive. Some ate each other. Some reached islands that required crossing open ocean before your species had figured out how to stay in one place long enough to plant a seed. Some survived for 2 million years and then vanished in a geological instant when a weaker, lighter, more adaptable cousin arrived in their territory. Today, there is one species of human on the planet. That has almost never been the case. The genus Homo has been pruned to a single surviving twig. Every other branch ended in a cave, a gorge, a riverbed, or the bottom of a well that someone forgot to check for 85 years. The question is not how we ended up alone. The question is whether alone is the natural state or the anomaly, because the fossil record points one direction, the silence around us points in the other, and we are the only ones left to wonder which one is the truth. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on the screen.